Hello, everyone. I am that Weems guy here for First Person Safety, and you are in for a treat tonight because we are joined by an honest to goodness, bona fide professional podcaster. And, and that is Bryan Eastridge. Bryan, introduce yourself to everyone.
Well, I think that introduction was pretty gracious. I don't know about professional podcaster. Um, Somebody said you have to get paid to do something to be considered a professional. So we'll see how that goes in the next few months. But aside from that, I guess if they don't listen to my podcast, I've been a cop for 19 years and a firearms instructor for 16 of that, and a few years in the military before that, and PPC shooter and three gunner and IDPA shooter, like a generation ago. But then got my own training company and own EDC belt company and do the off duty, on duty podcast that you've been a guest on. So
There you
lots of
go. And
many
returning the
hats.
favor. Yeah.
I'm wearing the EDC belt co hat today because I don't have any hats for the other companies. So
That's good marketing. You got the swag going.
yeah, and you caught me post rifle in service, so I got the Jeff Lebowski T-shirt on. So sorry I didn't dress up for this, but
There you go. Um, you hold a distinction of doing something in PPC as well, don't you?
I am an NRA distinguished revolver shooter since I think 2007. So that was a pretty good accomplishment, and I think the program's been around since like 1966, and I was number 740. I don't know why I remember that, but badge number 740, and I don't I think they're on about 820 or 830 now. So, and that was 14 years ago. So
There's
not a
not
lot
that
of
many.
people. Yeah.
And of course, as we talked about in episodes of your show, that the revolver is just a dying thing.
It's making a comeback in some ways, and it's dying of certain aspects of it are dying a slow death. So it's sad and innovative at the same time. I mean, but the bigger thing is I don't see ammo companies putting a lot of effort into revolver ammo anymore.
Right.
So it's kind of a disappointment. But you know,
Yeah, we're starting to see bulk 9mm on the shelves around here, but I still can't find 38.
yeah. And the last prices I paid for 38 ammo, I was kind of an eye opener, and the days of finding gold medal match sitting on the shelves at Walmart I think those days have come to a close. So
Yeah. All
so
right.
that's a little sad, but
Yeah, that is. The other night, you put something on the internet that tended to upset some people, and I thought whether we would give it further exposure on the internet so that we can upset even more people. And that was something to do with the whole notion of the sub 1 second draw. Why don't you tell everybody about your post and we got it started?
so I have this real knack for posting something on the internet or on Facebook or Instagram, whatever,
Uh,
that seems to be a bit inflammatory. And generally, it's not that I'm trying to be inflammatory, but if you look at the people that post in the comments, it tends to get the attention as some, like Robbie Latham on that post posted, well, I guess I'll slow down then. And, just kind of in jest. And,
mhm.
but I posted this quote from a mutual friend of you and I's who shall remain nameless because he didn't give me permission to quote it. But he said, "Man, you show me a guy that runs a sub-second draw. I'll show you a guy that should probably be practicing something else." And that incensed a lot of people. And I thought, and there was some good, inspiring conversation that came from it, and some people shared it on forums and stuff. And it spread like wildfire. And I went, I think I broke the internet or something, um, but it did inspire a lot of encouraging like back and forth between a lot of people that I really respect as instructors and shooters. So and it was really aimed kind of more towards the concept or the context of like concealed carry. Um, guys shooting out of a USPSA rig, yeah, get after it. Like,
Hmm.
you're not shooting really a retention system that does anything more than hold the gun. Um, and that's a key part of that sport. Whereas for the concealed carrying populace, it's kind of a goal that's really not all that realistic. Um, and, and I don't mean it's not something you should aspire to, but it's, in a canned setting.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's pull a sub-second draw from an appendix rig. That's really neat, but it's nothing I've ever seen that I've wanted to put all that much effort into, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's one of those things that the people that can accomplish it, and God bless them for developing that skill for being able to do it. Um, One is that's a sub-second draw to a known stimulus with no decision making. And as you and I well know, in the real world out and the average concealed carrier, there's a lot of decision making that has to take place before even that draw would begin. And that doesn't happen with the buzzer or the target's turning or the whistle blowing. That's not a known stimulus. It's going to be an unknown stimulus that has to be processed. You and I are both cops, and we see the same thing that the average citizen would see in that type situation. Um, Typically, if you're involved in a shooting and the incident started with your gun in the holster, or the shooting portion of the incident started with your gun in the holster, you were probably behind the eight ball.
Yeah. And yeah, and I made a comment on there later about, anytime that I've been in a situation where a gun's come into play, I've already had it in my hand. Now, you and I are in the prisoner taking business,
Hmm.
right? I mean, that's what we
Right,
do is uh, we pluck weeds from the Lord's garden, to use the parlance of Wayne Dobbs,
right,
and place them into some type of confinement, right? And generally, if we perceive the threat that there's even a potential for lethal force to be employed, we're already going to have the gun in our hand in some fashion. Um, so the draw speed thing really doesn't come into play. But how many cops do you ever see that practice from a low ready? They're almost
right,
always drawn from a holster. And on the quasi armed citizen side, it's almost polar opposite.
right,
You see a lot of people practicing from low ready, high ready positions, retention positions, and the holster part, it seems to be a little more practical for that aspect, so that we don't get into the whole brandishing and
right,
um, but there again, it all boils down to, like you said, it's like the decision making portion. And I am all for, if somebody's got a consistent sub-second draw from concealment, that's great. I just, if you got it, it's time to move on. Let's do something else. Let's learn to, make decisions while we're engaged in some type of training, right?
right,
Shoot, no shoot decisions, muzzle awareness, you know, and cops are notorious for flagging people with a muzzle. It happens. It's not acceptable, but it's a reality that happens. Sometimes guns get pointed at people that they probably shouldn't,
right.
but we should strive to, you know, eliminate that. But on the armed citizen side, it's like, how difficult is it to set up a scenario with live ammunition that you have to make decisions? There's just very few people that really put a lot of emphasis on that. So,
Yeah,
and that's a very worthwhile endeavor, and it's a very difficult, say, training to accomplish. But and very few people seem to be training that method. It's all speed, 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 accuracy, accuracy, accuracy. That's great. There's a whole nother level to this whole shooting thing, and it's when to not can I shoot better or can I do these things better, but when to shoot better and knowing how to do these things better in the context of armed conflict, right?
right. There's no penalty on the range for muzzling a no shoot target. But there very well may be repercussions for that in the real world for muzzling someone that you shouldn't be pointing a gun at.
Right. There's very serious repercussions for that.
Right.
Um, I mean, the folks that were out brandishing firearms in their front yard when the riot, the armed mob came through, got to see that firsthand.
Right.
You know, um, they pled to some lesser charges, but the bottom line is they spent 6 months charged with a felony.
Right.
I mean, is what it is.
Yeah. This whole thing that has turned into a show kind of got started with me challenging some conventional wisdom that's being put forth about red dots. That sights, red dot sights mounted on pistols or pistol mounted optics. And one of the early responses I got to that was, "But cops point guns at people all the time." I'm like, yeah, and that's a problem. And that because they may do it all the time does not make it the right thing to do or the legal thing to do.
Yeah, and there are like Oklahoma has some statutory exemptions for police officers in the line of duty with the that kind of negate some of the pointing a firearm type charges that maybe the
Right.
average citizen would have. The threshold for the threat of imminent danger is much lower,
Right.
is basically the way to sum it up. If I think there's a bad guy in a building, I don't have to like ask permission to pull my gun out and go search for that person. Um, Average, armed citizen, there's no obligation to go get the bad man, you know?
Right.
So consequently, there's some statutory language that the pointing a fire, it gives you some exemptions for pointing a firearm. Um, with the advent of body camera, I haven't seen it yet, but I feel like the day is coming that there's going to be some prosecutorial body that reviews footage and goes, why was that officer pointing that gun at that person?
Yeah.
Does that meet the threshold of this exemption? Things that we've never had to deal with before. Um, and that's not to say that that's an excuse or that stuff was acceptable in the past, but I think the bar has been raised for performance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me. And it's something that quite frankly, it's a bar that needs to be raised.
Yeah, absolutely. The the days of pointing a gun at a misdemeanant, pulling the convenience store beer run are probably coming to a close.
Yeah.
Which I I can't think of too many rookie cops 10 years ago that wouldn't have done that. But there again, did that make it right at the time? No, but it was just part of, I don't want to say culture, but
Right.
it I don't even know how to really put that one into words, but I mean, I've seen a lot of that over the years, and it's not that there's any malice or ill intent. It's just that's the way people's mindset was. Well, there's
Right.
somebody running. Why are they running from me? Maybe I
Yeah.
should have my gun in case this turns into a confrontation. So,
Hey, you mentioned the misdemeanor fleeing. The Supreme Court just changed the rules on that, what, 3 weeks ago? That they expressively said there is no rule that allows to the hot pursuit chasing a misdemeanor into a residence.
yeah, and
And
I was aware of a case out of Oklahoma where um, that that very situation came up uh, on a pursuing a motor vehicle, somebody fleeing in a motor
right.
vehicle that bails out, they lose sight, person is seen in a house, door gets kicked in, bad guy gets arrested. Um, that ended up getting thrown out because, well, all you had at the time was a misdemeanor. And if you saw that person in that house later after contact was lost, it wasn't fresh pursuit at that point,
Right.
then to go get that person, a search warrant would have had to been obtained.
Right.
Well, who's going to, at 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday, what judge is going to go, yeah, that's okay. Traffic charges. Yeah, go kick that guy's door in and get him,
Right.
and that's one of the hardest things that I think a lot of policemen struggle with is there's a time that you have to let people go. And that is not in our nature. It's just not.
Right.
And there's sometimes the criminals just get away. And you have to think out of the box and be smarter about the way that you address that. Whereas, in the 80s, 90s, and even into the 2000s, oh, bad guy's in that house. Go get him. We don't know that he lives there or not. Um, somebody told us a felon was in that house. Let's go get him.
Yeah.
It's I don't think you're going to be wrong with a search warrant,
Yeah.
But
It's never wrong to stop and get the search warrant. Never.
no. But that's a hard for a lot of guys, especially in our profession, especially younger guys. It is really hard to to put the dogs on a leash, so to speak, because you take that job because you have the nature of wanting to do right and wanting to make bad people not do bad things to good people, or victimize the public. And there's just sometimes you have to step back and go, we'll get them another time or we'll get them later. And that's really difficult. I mean, I've been faced with those situations, and I'm like, oh, that dude is standing in the window of his house, communicating to me with one finger, and there's not a thing I can do about it but drive away. Yeah. But
Yeah.
anyway.
Yep. Well, back to firearms for a minute and one of the current trends. And I'm going to put you on the spot here just for the enjoyment of our audience. And the other night, you and I had a phone call that we should have recorded because that would have been 3 great podcast episodes for both of us. If I understood you correctly, you said that you knew of 3 officers who have been involved in shootings that had red dots on their pistols that now no longer carry red dots on their guns. Is that correct?
Yeah. And these are not people from my agency
Right.
either. Yeah. And they were 3 kind of, and I won't cite the cases because a couple of them are still in litigation.
Right.
And it was really kind of surprising to me because one of them in particular had been in multiple shootings over the past 20 some years, and his last one involved a red dot, and shortly after he was like, maybe I need to get more training with it. And he's kind of floats back and forth with irons and a red dot. The other 2, one of them had a complete failure, and that's something that I see that's endemic in the industry. And I am not anti red dot. I'm not. But when we want a solution, we will find it. And it's kind of like, the first thing you learn in a statistics class is that you can make statistics sound however you want to make them sound, right? You can drive them to whatever narrative you need. And it seemed to me that the whole industry jumped in both feet head first, with without some due caution. And I think there are some instructors out there that are doing a fabulous job of training people how to employ those. But you and I well know in law enforcement, there's a new gadget, there's a new flashlight out. Everybody's got to get it. There's a new single pane holographic sight that shall remain nameless that was on at like every rifle in America. That 10 years later, Rutro, there's a problem.
Yeah.
That we knew about but didn't say anything to anybody about. And hindsight's 2020. But of course, because it was so effective at what we did, we just kind of went, well, so what if it doesn't hold zero? We're just zero rifles more,
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I was with the red dot. So with talking to these people that had been involved in incidents, one of them was like, "I'll never again. Nope, I'm done with it." One of them was like, mixed. The other one was kind of mixed opinion. Um, Pretty much all three of them blanket said that it had no bearing on the outcome, like zero bearing. Both of them, or all three of them, survived. All three of them were successful. It was just, it gave them pause, so to speak.
Right.
Um, because the brain does weird things when you're under high stress, right? So a couple of them said, I never saw the dot. It could have been there. The one said, never saw it, but I could see the impact of the round, so it wasn't an issue. But it had no bearing on the outcome of the shooting. It wasn't, well, I perceived all this data and I was able to make more accurate shots and I was able to perform better because of this piece of equipment. All three of them were like,
Yeah.
it kind of goes back to the whole, well, I never saw my sights, but I knew they were there kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that whole thing about the you'll see more data and everything else. And while I do think that's true on the square range, and it may eventually translate over into the field, a lot of that's justification to sell red dot transition courses to agencies.
could be.
Yeah.
That to me goes back to that statistics class. Well, we can make the data show what we want you to
Right.
read. And I'm not knocking people that have done white papers about it. I think
Right.
there's some really valuable stuff there. The places, and there's a few places that I see it has a massive benefit. Um, Reduced targets, non-full value targets
Mhm.
inside of close distance. And I'm referring to what we in the cop world used to call the old hostage shot, right? Like I got to make a shot inside of 10 yards that needs to be a lethal shot right now, or a potentially fatal shot right now. Putting, putting a round in somebody's dome at 7 yards, that under stress with iron sights becomes a very tall order. Uh, and with the red dot, I see, okay, there's a large benefit there because you're seeing a very finite, perfect sight picture.
Right.
The speed aspect of it is not a factor at that point, right?
Right.
I mean, it may be rushed, but if I've got time to make a precision shot with irons, I'm going to have time to make a precision shot with a dot. So I do see it. It has some inherent benefit.
Right.
The things, some of the things and some of the justifications, like, well, the military, there's units in the military that, uh, use these effectively, and they've done more damage to the evil population than Ebola did. When I get it, right? The difference between them and I is those guys, but typically before they're going to leave to do some type of mission, they're going to confirm zero on their rifle and their red dot.
Right.
When I drive out of the station parking lot, it it may be a month before I get to shoot my gun again.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect. To me, there's been no perfect solution for I can bolt this on my gun and have predictable there's always some kind of huge learning curve about, well, if you dismount the batteries and the torque spec here, and if you use the rubber gasket it's all wrought with ambiguity. And I'm waiting for the day that they go, here's the gun, here's the dot. It mounts in a manner that you don't have to put these, 40 thousandths taller suppressor height sights. And,
Right.
you don't have to worry about, am I carrying a brand X battery versus a brand Y battery versus, is it waterproof? Is it water resistant? There's just a lot of stuff out there that make me go, you guys in the industry figure that out. And then I'll drift over I'll I'll step across the line, and all the bugs will
Right.
be worked out. I don't drive a Model A car. I try not to fly in a Model A airplane. Um, you know,
Yeah.
so
On the square range, I'm loving the precision that I'm getting with the dot.
mhm.
Absolutely thoroughly loving it. And I have diagnosed some things in my shooting that I was not seeing with the iron sights. Uh, so one last little topic I want to hit on this with the red dots, especially for the cop world. There's a growing body of evidence of duty holsters that have gaps in them because of the weapon mounted lights that are allowing trigger fingers to or firing objects to work their way into the holster and access the trigger. There was a video of one in Vegas last week, I think, that started hitting the internet. As you look at duty gear that is available for uniformed cops that have red dot mounted or pistol mounted optics, try to find one that doesn't also come for weapon mounted light.
Yeah, and I personally know of somebody that had their firearm discharged in the holster unintentionally.
Yeah.
Even by the suspect. As far as I knew, the guy wasn't trying to get the officer's gun out of the holster. His hands just ended up, in the
Yeah.
tussle being in there, and pow, which caused, memos and policies, stuff like that.
Admin
I'm sure
happened.
yeah, admin happened. And,
Yeah.
Lots of Allen wrenches came out, and,
Right.
um, and that's one of the other places, weapon mounted lights. I think they're a phenomenal tool.
Right.
I am really enjoying that they have started to streamline those, but there again, like you said, some of the holsters, when you have a light that's bigger than the firearm on the front,
Right.
they don't make those. They make the holsters dimensional, but they're two-dimensional, so they have to accommodate everything else, and there tends to be some gaps around the trigger. Um, at the time that happened, I was carrying a 226 double action SIG, and you couldn't, the way my holster was cut, you couldn't get your finger in far enough and it had the hood. I'm not going to throw brands out there because
Right.
like that, but it had a hood that prevented the double action hammer from actually getting back far enough to fire.
Right.
So I went, non-issue. And people laughed at me for carrying a double action, single action gun. Like, oh, that's archaic. And I'm like, well, you know what? My gun didn't go off in the holster.
Yeah.
Not saying that was why I carried it solely, but
Right.
plus one, So, and I've just, it's funny, we went from sub-second draw to red dot, and
Yeah.
those two things seem to go hand in hand for
Mm-hmm.
some reason too.
Right.
And for me, when I look at that and see that, I go, well, okay, that's a proof of concept that you can be as fast with iron, or as fast with a dot, or faster than you can be with irons at reasonable distances, and, reasonable, reasonable value target. So, hey, more power to them. That's awesome. Um, how about we, maybe learn to drive that dot from a Sewell position, or from,
Yeah.
a low ready, or, something, and make a decision while we're doing it. I mean, and, everything's in building blocks. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, go ahead.
It's just like, right now, most of the training is centered around the presentation of the dot to the target because that's the hardest part to learn. And as we well know, the stuff you're talking about as far as decision making, that's a weak point in the law enforcement and the private sector training anyway,
So
much
how
less
many,
trying to add it into something else.
right. So how many times do you think in a career, and you've been doing this a little longer than me, how many times do you think, you speculate, that you've drawn your gun from the holster?
Oh,
Thousands?
as far as like just drawing and shooting and training, or
No,
drawing in
no,
the
I'm talking
field.
about in the field for
In the
real.
field, of course, you got to remember, understand 12 of my 22 years have been spent in admin land.
Right.
Um, I'm probably 50 or so.
Okay.
Yeah, and of course I haven't worked the big city like you have.
Well, yeah, but
Yeah,
okay. So 50 times. In those
yeah,
50 times that you drew, did you present to the target and pull the trigger through?
no,
Nope.
yeah,
I have discharged my firearm one time, on duty, on Cujo. That
Uh-huh.
wasn't the dog's real name, but it
Right.
was like a 260-pound Saint Bernard that had chewed a man's tricep off.
Right.
Uh, and I'll we talk about decision making. This really, I've told this story a few times, and I go, when I exit my police car, my partner's yelling for backup. There's a man laying on the ground with arterial spurt, screaming, "Shoot him! Shoot him! Shoot him!" Not saying shoot the dog, saying shoot him.
Yeah.
When I get out, I see the man's grievous injury. And when I get out, there's another man holding a splitting maul. He doesn't see me. I'm behind him at about 10 yards. So guns coming out, and the challenge is getting ready to be issued for this, what appears to be person that has an implement that could have caused this
Yeah.
injury. And before I can get the words drop it out of my, you know, out, I notice he's focused in on an area of this yard. And about that time, my partner comes out, bailing out backwards, Glock in one hand, taser in the other, being pursued by this massive dog. And I mean, the old movie Cujo, blood in the
Uh-huh.
mane and all. Yeah, I'm like, it was freakish. So, okay, I've now eliminated that this person did not do this to this person. My partner's focused on this aggressive animal. He's at about 30 yards. I close the distance. He runs at an angle, and I step, plant, and do a presentation from basically like a compressed high ready, and fire 5 rounds, score 5 hits on this dog while it's moving. I'm moving, partner's moving out of the way. And all of this happens in a matter of less than probably 5 seconds. I mean, it was just assess this threat. It's no longer a threat. Move to the next threat, eliminate that threat. And now, okay, there's not a person involved in this. It was just this thing did this to. And about the time the shooting's done, I hear, "Did you shoot the dog? Did you get the dog?" And I'm like, "Okay, we've made the right decision here."
Uh-huh.
And I look back, guy with the axe is gone, never to be seen again. I don't know what happened to him. He just, was a good Samaritan that um, could have potentially been looking down the muzzle of a gun.
Right.
The draw speed was not a factor. It just wasn't. And the presentation didn't start from the holster. It started from up here. Bam. Um, so I look at how many times I've drawn my gun in a street setting, and I can think of 0 times that I would present from the holster and fire a shot. Do I practice it? Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a thing. It could happen, right? But there's way more probability that I'm going to have to do some processing and decision making before go to the holster, defeat this, that, and the other, bring it up into eye line, drive it to the target. That rarely happens from the holster.
Right.
Like, it's in the law enforcement context, rarely. Um, I traffic stops. Yeah, I think that's probably where it probably happens the
Uh-huh.
most. But the
Or in an attempt to take someone into actual custodial arrest when you're going to put
right,
the handcuffs on.
and then some type of lethal threat
Right.
ensues. Um, in the ones that I've seen in that, and thank God for body camera footage, because
Uh-huh.
we start to get this data, is typically there. The draw the draw comes in as soon as I'm able to make distance, or
Right.
the officer is able to make distance. Is the speed a factor in that? Maybe somewhat, but it's more the mechanics of it.
Right.
I bring it in, I get it in a compressed, uh, like a retention position, shooting from retention while I'm grappling with someone.
Right.
So you see that, but flat footed, 10 yards, hands in a surrender position, buzzer,
Yeah.
draw to first shot. That's not reality. That's not life. That's a
Right.
mechanics exercise, right? And I see people get real wrapped around the axle about, man, I'm shooting 1.5s, I'm shooting 1.4s, I'm shooting 1.3s. Okay, move on. Like,
Right.
you got it. Good. Um, and I don't know why that has become a barometer in
Right.
police work and defensive carry. Um,
Because it's something we can measure standing on the range.
Yeah. And again, I'm not knocking it. It's just if that's where
Right.
you're spending the bulk of your day, brother, the first time you get punched in the nose, that sub-second draw is not a thing.
Right.
It's, have some fighting skills, have some decision making skills, have the ability to have combat patience and take in a situation as it's starting to unfold and start going through Colonel Boyd's loop of how do I address this? Um, you know, let's look at Cooper's combat triad and go, okay, all these things, are they in balance? Or is the sub-second draw in the, you know, marksmanship skills, is that so far to one side of the triad that I forget the whole mindset part? Or, the gun handling and tactics part, is
Right.
that suffering because I'm spending all my efforts and ammo over here? And a lot of the time with people I train with, and Daryl Bulkey really gave me a bunch of info on like Cooper's combat triad, and really it's amazing that, in 1972 or whenever he came up with that, I haven't found any barometer that's better for measuring yourself and your personal skills in a combative setting.
Right.
So I see these guys just incessantly practice one piece of that to the point that the others suffer so bad they're not even addressed, or really, so. And that's kind of what inspired that whole post that
Yeah.
apparently red flares went up, and
Yeah.
people were fast roping out of helicopter, whatever.
Yeah. I'll say this: in my time as chief, we had 3 deputy involved shootings, and all 3, the deputies had their firearms already in their hands at the time. None of them were. Now, one was involved with a rifle, and the other 2 were pistols. But the deputy, each one of those, the weapon was at the ready when the actual shooting incident began. And while I guessed at the number 50 is the number of times I've actually drawn the weapon in the field, I've had 3 instances in which I was stone cold justified uh, to engage in deadly force or deploy deadly force.
Mhm.
I haven't done that because we were able to resolve those situations. In all 3 of those instances, the gun was in my hands. It wasn't a presentation well, there was a presentation from the holster, but it was not at the time the decisions were made.
Right.
And, while that's only 6 incidents and it was completely anecdotal, it's pretty strong anecdotal evidence. And it's not empirical by any means, and I'm not trying to claim it is.
Right. But that seems to be, to me, the more shining reality than beep,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. John Hearn and I, in a previous episode, he discussed Gary Kleck's research. And, one of the things he talks about was the vast number of defensive gun uses in which no shot was fired. With the situation resolved, and what we're meaning by that was the number of times that people actually drew a weapon, but they ended up not shooting, which means there was an intermediary step in between the firearm being accessed and the decision to shoot being made. And,
Yeah, and
I think that tends to boil it out.
it does. And of that, I would say in the LE context, other than, you know, terminating someone's pet,
Mhm.
the I've probably drawn my gun 250 times. Several, and I lost. I used to kind of track my personal stuff, but
Mhm.
I decided, you know what, I'd rather just an attorney track that for me. I
Yeah.
don't, what I'm saying. Like I
Mhm.
didn't want to have like records and file folders of incidents, but um, probably 35, 40 of them would have been completely justified. And this is something that if I could ever get every cop in America to understand, and Scott Reitz does a pretty good speech on it. But the more confident you are, and the better equipped you are with your handgun or whatever sidearm you're issued, the more proficient you are, the further you can let a situation digress
Mhm.
and deteriorate before you have to employ lethal force.
Yeah.
Um, and consequently, a lot of your cops that are, they go into their own pocket for their training budget, portions of it. They seek out other training. They shoot competition. They get a degree of proficiency with their sidearm that could only be described as obsessive in other, maybe other aspects of life. The less risk they are of shooting someone,
Mhm.
even in a situation where it could be completely warranted, uh, because the gun is no longer the skill level needed to employ the gun is no longer a factor.
An expert has an automatic use of the tool. Bill Lewinsky.
Yes. And that is something that, if I had a magic wand I could wave over every cop in America, it would be like, dude, the gun in your holster means a lot more than the pin in your shirt. It'll save your life, it'll get you sued, or it'll get you put in prison. That's the three outcomes you're looking at. Sometimes it can do all three in one shot,
Right.
in one setting. Um, and the perception that you saved your life becomes the tricky point. But you have a 1 in 3 odds that it's not going to go in your way.
It's like the forward pass in football. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
either going to be a completion, an incompletion, or an interception.
right. It's like it's like the conversations I had, when I'd buy a gun when I was married. Well,
Mhm.
my wife will either get over it or she won't. That's the two options, right? Like, to
And
use the
apparently she
parlance,
didn't because it was the when I was married. So
twice,
yeah,
right? But all that to say,
yeah.
if you could change the cultural mindset to go, um, and I play guitar. I'm not a
Mhm.
master by any stretch, but but I have the confidence to know my left and right limits with that,
Right.
right? If you took the handgun as seriously as you took, a hobby, fishing or whatever, um, man, your odds of having to deploy that go way down.
Yeah.
And it's the same with defensive tactics, handcuffing, things like that. The more proficient we get at those
Mhm.
things, the less risk we are. And I have a
Oh
dear
yeah.
friend, that works for CCW Safe now, is probably one of the most lethal human beings I've ever met. Was involved in very few use of force situations, and when he was, they were incredibly violent, incredibly fast, and over before anybody knew what. Like,
Right.
whoa, what was that? And the
Um,
handcuffs are on.
and you touched on something with that handcuffing skills.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, that's probably more important than anything else because the crazy stuff you see out there where people try and put the cuffs on and their confidence that opens up windows and opportunities that should not exist.
That is the moment when you and the bad guy both know
Wherever each other are.
exactly. And that is probably where 90% of the fights I've gotten into started.
All
And
right.
yeah, but
Well,
hopefully,
now,
man, we went through some rabbit holes, man.
right.
Like,
Well, now we know where our next episode will begin because it's going to begin with the talk of handcuffing, um, or something along those lines. Look, dude, I know you got to go. I enjoyed talking with you as always. And any closing final thought that you want to share with the audience?
um, yeah, if you're Hanny McMood and I had this conversation the other day. We said, at 1.5, 1.5 seconds, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm 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 on par. In 1.7, I can pick which eyeball you need to get shot in.
Mm-hmm.
That comes from knowing your skill set, right? Knowing it, testing it, practicing it. And that is consistent, cold, on demand performance,
Uh-huh.
right?
There you
And to
go.
me, every gunfight that every human being's ever been involved in has been on demand performance, cold. There
Right.
was no warm up. So yeah, that's kind of my final spiel for the night.
All right, cool. And folks, this is Bryan Eastridge of the Off Duty On Duty podcast and the EDC Belt Company. So make sure you give both of those a check out online and buy one of his belts and listen to his podcast. And hopefully he'll be back on this show, which is again a complete and total accident. But well, it seems to be working. So, folks, I do sincerely appreciate you for your time, and check us out. The show will be posted on YouTube and on all the various podcast platforms under that Weems guy on the podcast. So, again, thank you for your time, and I'm Lee for First Person Safety.
Thanks, Lee.